Have you heard about the danger of plant-based meats? There's been, in the last couple of years, a lot of headlines about Beyond Meat and the fact that it was, too high in saturated fat and it was going to cause you to gain weight, et cetera, and that you were much better off eating beef. So a researcher by the name of Stephen Gardner, he's out of Stanford, he was hired by Beyond Meat, so he's very straightforward in saying that this was an industry funded study. He's very transparent about that. But first of all, most studies are industry funded. But what's really good about this one, and Stephen Gardner in his relationship with Stanford, is that he is by contract mandated that any study he does has to be published. So it can't be one of these, the industry is not happy because it didn't like your results, and so it's just going to be chucked. It's going to be put in the circular file, never to be seen again. And if you're not aware of this, this is a huge problem that we have with the pharmaceutical industry and their studies, is that they'll just keep doing studies until they've manipulated the data to what they want to show, and any study that doesn't show that is just thrown out. So and this is why we then later on find all these terrible things about drugs that weren't there in the study that was published, but was found out in the studies that were not published. So anyway, Stephen Gardner, very transparent about the fact that he was hired to do this study. It was the type of study apparently he specializes in, and he said that there were 7 prior studies where he was paid to do the study, and they showed poor results, meaning the industry that paid the money was not happy with the outcome, but they were still published because that is his contract. Okay, so here's the study. It was 36 individuals. They were meat eaters because they figured having people eat beef who were vegan probably wasn't going to fly. So these are people that were meat eaters anyway, and they got 8 weeks of Beyond Meat, and they got 8 weeks of beef, and the order of it was not the same. So like half saw the Beyond Meat first in their diet, and the second beef was second, and then vice versa. So it was randomized is the word I was looking for. So they were eating ground beef, and they were eating 2 servings a day. So they decided that was a robust enough amount of whether it was the Beyond Meat ground meat or beef ground meat. And when it came to the beef, they really went all out with organic, grass-fed, what was the other word? Regenerative beef. So they got the best of the best ground beef. So they couldn't come back and say, well, it wasn't the best quality. So it was very, very good quality. And the results were as follows. As far as, so Beyond Meat is kind of chastised for having coconut oil, which is a saturated fat, and it is a saturated fat. But when you compare it to the saturated fat in beef, there was less. So there was less saturated fat that the people were consuming with the Beyond Meat. Sodium is another thing that the Beyond Meat was talked about as far as having too much. But what they found when they analyzed what the people ate was that the sodium ended up being the same because people salted their meat before they cooked their burger. So that was interesting. Calories were the same. Fiber was definitely higher in the Beyond Meat because it's a plant-based product, and that really is the problem with animal protein, is that there's 0 fiber, and most Americans get like 2% of what they really need, or 7%. Sorry, I haven't said that stat in a while, but I think 93% of Americans don't get enough fiber. So a huge percentage of us, and that's healthy for our gut microbiome, protective of your colon, etc. So the fact that the Beyond Meat had fiber was good. It was higher in antioxidants, higher in complex carbohydrates, and then the protein. So the protein was the same. So the amount of protein being consumed was identical. Then we got into cholesterol. So the bad cholesterol, considered the low density lipoproteins, that was less in the Beyond Meat than it was in the beef. The blood pressure of the individuals in the study stayed the same, and their weight actually went down a little bit with the Beyond Meat as compared to the beef. So the other thing that was coming out about Beyond Meat was that, oh, it's high in saturated fat and it's high in salt and you're going to gain weight. And that just wasn't demonstrated in this study. And let me interject for a moment, because some of you don't listen to the whole video, is I'm not a proponent of living on Beyond Meat. I'm not saying that. But occasionally if you miss a burger, or I occasionally miss sausages because I'm Italian and I kind of like to make my my bonza pasta, which is made from chickpeas and very high in protein, and I just miss sausage. So the Beyond Meat has sausage that tastes like sausage, and I'm definitely not interested in what real meat sausage contains, because we can talk about that another time. So I'm not saying, oh, Beyond Meat's better than lentils or organic soy or anything like that. We're just comparing, if you're making a choice between beef and some of these plant-based meats, is it really a bad idea to do the plant-based meat or not? Okay, so that's what the study was about. The other thing was a substance called TMAO, and there's a lot of argument about this, whether it leads to heart disease or not, but it is something that if you're plant-based, you make hardly any of. You actually need to be consuming eggs, beef to make TMAO, and there is some link to increased heart disease with TMAO. So what they found was that when people ate the beef first, so they were in the group where the beef was first and the Beyond Meat was second, that their TMAO went down at the end of the study, and I'll explain why. So initially their TMAO went up because they were eating 2 servings of beef every single day, which I think, I don't know, I don't think there's that many Americans who do that. So the TMAO went up, but then it went down. And it went down because they weren't sort of feeding the bacteria in the gut that make the TMAO. So that makes sense. And it happened within 2 weeks, and then it sustained for the rest of the 6 weeks of the second 8-week study, part of the study. So it was 8 weeks and 8 weeks, so it was 16 weeks total. What was interesting, though, was that if they ate the Beyond Meat for the first 8 weeks and then the beef, they didn't see the TMAO go up. It went down a bit because they weren't eating the beef, and then the second 8 weeks of eating the beef, they didn't see the rise. And there's a lot of research that explains this, which is simply that you change your microbiome with what you eat. So if you're eating a lot of, if you're on a plant-based diet, your TMAO will go down, that inflammatory marker will go down, and it's because, 8 weeks is a good chunk of time, right? That's 2 months, and you've starved out these organisms in your gut. You're not feeding them the food that makes them procreate, so their levels go down, and you have a bit of a protective period. So during that second 8 weeks of eating the beef again, it didn't jump up, and they were protected, which again, I've definitely done a lot of research into this, and that's what's seen. So what do you want to take away from this? There isn't a lot of negative. There's really no negative for these plant-based meats. So the study was very well done that way. So you don't have to worry about that if you're plant-based and you want to indulge with something that's like a burger or sausage. Thanks. Good to see you too, Travis. And then when it comes to eating beef, there's definitely raise your LDL, etc. I think what was good about the study was that they really made the extra effort of spending so much money on the grass-fed, organic beef. But how many of us do that, especially with the cost of groceries these days? How many of us can afford to do that? I don't think too many, but Beyond Meat is Beyond Meat. So what you get is what you get, versus with beef, you'd have to pay a lot more money to get that level of sort of safety with the beef. So something to think about. But I wanted to present this information because, again, I don't want you living on Beyond Meat. I don't want you having 2 servings a day. I want a nice, robust variety in your diet and lots of plants. And I like, plant-based proteins as well. If you want to do a little eggs, you want to do a little fish. Beef is not my first choice at all. But hopefully this data maybe calmed you down a little bit about the plant-based meats and not so worrisome, because there was definitely a concerted effort to take down these companies with a lot of negative press that came out. So I just ran across Stephen Gardner from Stanford and learned about his study and heard him speaking about it. And so it was fascinating because we do always have that moment of, oh, industry funded, you know, but finding out that he has to publish regardless the results, and he's published, and it was actually his first industry funded study that showed a positive for the industry that funded it. So that was good news as well. But generally speaking, if your health is not the way you want it to be, please let us know. If you like the information on the channel, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, share it with others so more people can see this, and let me know what you want to hear about. And have a great weekend. It's Friday, and I'll see you Monday. Bye-bye.